Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome to Turn 1's race recap for the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in Jeddah. We are your hosts, Thomas
and Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, we had another really good race to kick off this season.
Yeah, this one was wild.
So 2 weeks ago, we had Bahrain. Obviously, a lot of learning out of that race, seeing where the Aston Martin comes into play, seeing McLaren's downfall and the Alpines out of the race. Fast forward 2 weeks, now we're in Jeddah, and the Red Bull situation seems to be holding exactly where we thought it would, but the midfield, I think, is still wide open for the 2 through 5 spot.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I think that we kind of assumed that Red Bull was going to be dominant just because of the Bahrain Grand Prix. But with the differences in track, we didn't know how that would play in, because we know that around Jeddah, it's a lot less tire degradation than in Bahrain. So you could have a chance for the Ferrari and Mercedes to have a lot better of a race. But I mean, we just didn't see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're new here, here's what we do in the race recaps. We're going to run through real quick the race weekend. We're going to talk about just an observation or two out of the practices and out of qualifying, and then we will get into the race and we will go kind of lap by lap, but we're going to skip around because we know not every lap has solid action in it. Jeremiah, did you notice anything in practices 1 through 3 that stood out to you?
For one, we finally got to see the Alpine's pace. We got to see where they stacked up in the actual standings. Granted that practices don't really count because everybody could be running different strategies. So we don't know really what's being tested in that moment. So not everybody is necessarily running their fastest setup. But we did see Aston Martin rather, continue to hold right below the Red Bulls and sit there. And we even saw in practice session 3, Fernando Alonso split the Red Bulls. So that was pretty exciting. My last note for qualifying was Oscar Piastri in 9th. Whoa.
As we discussed, we will see if that held. But yeah, he did. He's got something, right? He's definitely got something. Okay, going into qualifying, Q1 had Lando Norris out with an engine failure or whatever it was. That is 2 race weekends in a row of McLaren reliability issues.
Yeah, it's kind of scary. You can almost, I think you made the comment earlier while we were chatting a little bit before we started, that they're almost starting to look like the new Ferrari in terms of their reliability problems, and there's they might have a great practice session and then maybe even a strong qualifying, but in Lando's case not so much. But their durability just really needs some work. That's, I think, what needs to be their main focus going forward.
Absolutely. Verstappen out in Q2, he had a transmission drive shaft type problem, so he starts in the 15 spots. Charles Leclerc gets a 10-place grid penalty for changing out some electronic component of his car. And then here's the note that I found the most interesting from qualifying. Me and you have run this track a lot in the F1 video games. There's nowhere to run off the track, yet they were deleting lap times left and right for the one tire going off the line, which I've never heard of that being a thing before.
I can't remember. I know what instance you're talking about. I can't remember who the driver was.
Turn 27.
Right, the final
more
turn.
Than one. It started with Logan Sargent, I think, because he came on the radio like, you can't go off the track there, mate.
Yeah, they're like, track limits on turn 27. He's like, there's nowhere to run off.
So I found that super, because like we're used to in Austria, right? The last turn in Austria going into the home straight, they all fly wide on that turn. They delete lap times. But in Jeddah, it's a closed street circuit. And that's when they made the clarification that it just takes one tire going over the line. I thought this was interesting. Did we ever think coming into this season that this would be Q3 for a race? Ready for this? Alonso, Leclerc, Sainz, Ocon, Gasly, Perez, Stroll, Russell, Hamilton, Piastri.
What? It's definitely a hodgepodge.
No Verstappen,
Right.
obviously. No Norris. All the Aston Martins.
But these are the stories that we like. It's whenever you take some of the top drivers and kind of give them a little downgrade to where now they're starting maybe out of the top 10, especially in this case. And then you can see some of the guys who typically start out of the top 10 kind of work their way into that top 10 and see if not only if they can hold their position, but maybe even fight and gain a couple. I mean,
Yeah,
stories like that are
absolutely.
awesome.
I took a couple notes, and I don't know if you have any as well. The Red Bull of Sergio looked noticeably faster than everybody else. I know he got out of there with like a half a second advantage, but just whenever they showed the cameras in front of the car as they were going through every turn, he was way more able to slice and dice through things than anybody else was. George Russell looked consistently faster than Lewis Hamilton, and that kind of proved out as qualifying went on as well. He also runs a way more aggressive line. We did not see that from George Russell last year. He was the finesse guy, he was the Lewis Hamilton style. He ran a way more Max Verstappen style qualifying. And then obviously Sergio Perez takes pole for 2 years in a row at Jeddah.
Yeah, to your point about George, he's kind of growing on me on this whole he's got the Lewis Hamilton finesse, but he's got this mind of a champion in terms of willing to do whatever it is to get it done. Now, granted, he might not have the car to get that done necessarily just yet, but he's making do with what he has. And for him to be able to put himself over Hamilton several times, I mean, he's showing me a lot of promise.
I think what really did it for him was the new F1 theme intro where they've got him standing between the two walls and
Okay.
he's all posed up. That really he flipped a switch with that. He's
Okay.
like, I'm here to stay, boys.
Yeah, it took off 4/10 with that.
All right, so your qualifying order goes Perez, Leclerc, Alonso, Russell, Sainz, Stroll, Ocon, Hamilton, Piastri, and Gasly. Now that did get a little mixed up where you have Nico Hulkenberg sneaking into the top 10 because Charles Leclerc took that 10-place grid penalty, dropping him out of the top 10 down to 12. So a little bit mixed up from normal. We will see way more of that as we get into the meat of the season when people start having to change out engines more and more and change out components. There's always one race a year where like 15 drivers take grid penalties.
I mean, that's gonna, yeah,
Okay.
to your point on that, that's gonna be a lot more common too, I think, this year, because we've already seen Ferrari have to switch out their component twice in the second race of the season so that they take a penalty.
A couple of
Jesus.
teams. A couple of teams have switched out twice already. I think Albon might have been another one. Okay, race setup. We are going into the Jeddah track. It is a street circuit, although it's kind of a made for racing street circuit where it's at. So it's like an artificial street circuit. Still really cool. I love the atmosphere. I have some more notes on that later. But 50 laps, they said it was the second longest track, which I didn't know. But I guess because it runs so fast, it doesn't feel like the longest track. 3 DRS zones, 27 turns. That is the most of all the tracks, although most of those turns are not turns. They go straight through them. You are full throttle 72% of the time, approximately. And Pirelli estimated that it would be a one-stop race, and I think that held
For some people,
for most teams.
Yeah.
Anybody without an issue. Here's my notes on the starting grid. All three tire compounds were run at the start. The only person on softs was Charles Leclerc, which I noted is a bold strategy by Ferrari. We are so accustomed to the 2022 Ferrari strategy of being horrible that anytime they do something outlandish in 2023, you worry. But that one paid off for them.
No, I agree with that point. I mean, there's nothing more to say about that one.
The commentators did note that in Jeddah, the second grid spot, the number 2 position, is actually favorable due to getting the inside line on turn number 1. So Alonso, even though he was in second, had a shot at Perez, which he took advantage of.
Yeah, I believe that this means that we're going to go ahead and dive into turn 1.
We're getting it's all 5 lights on, lights out, and away we go, and we are driving down the straight towards turn 1. Here's where this track really fits our podcast. This track has way more action in turn 1 than any other track. That's where everything happens. All of the passes, all of the maneuvering, all of the debris and carnage and all that. Everything happens in turn 1 at Jeddah.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and dive into it if you don't mind.
Please.
So we had Fernando Alonso taking off from the line. Sergio again with a bad start, just like in Bahrain. So Fernando gets the pass down the inside. That didn't last very long as Sergio ended up fighting for that back multiple laps later, but that's fine. So George Russell holds his position, stays in third. Carlos Sainz holds his position behind that, stays in fourth. Lance Stroll holds. Esteban Ocon holds. Hamilton holds. But then this is where it gets kind of dicey. So Oscar Piastri is going up on the inside. Pierre Gasly gets a good jump, comes outside on him, kind of smushes him into the wall and causes Oscar's front wing to break off, which of all people to run on it, Lando Norris runs over it a little bit later down the row.
Well, it was tough to see, even when they showed the replay, it was tough to see the damage and then showing them run over the track. They kept showing that helicopter angle, which was really hard to see the damage. But if you went back and watched like the onboard cams, you could see it.
Yeah, I went and watched Nico Hulkenberg's onboard cam, and I just watched Oscar Piastri get sandwiched into the wall. Further down after Pierre, you've got Nico Hulkenberg, Zhou, and Charles. Charles passing both of them off the jump. Zhou getting a run on Nico. Nico falls down to 12th. And now, so your order for there looks like Charles, Zhou, and then Nico. Valtteri holds. Max Verstappen holds. He had a good launch, but I think once he saw Bottas kind of like coming in overly aggressive, kind of trying to get in on the inside, Max kind of bailed out and just kind of held his own for a few turns and built up momentum. I think that he wasn't really looking for the aggressive start because he knew that the Red Bull had the pace overall.
Yeah.
After that, everybody pretty much holds. You have Lando Norris getting a jump on Nick DeVries, moving into 18th spot. So Nick moves down, and Logan Sargent with a horrible jump and just gets left by the pack.
So a couple of things I want to point on that. So you mentioned that Fernando Alonso had a really good jump, better than Sergio. I thought that as well. I was like, man, he is off the line quick. But there's some context to that. Okay. Their reaction times to the throttle, Sergio Perez, 0.15 seconds. Fernando Alonso, 0.20 seconds. Sergio was faster to throttle. Now, hang on. Here's where it gets crazy. The 0 to 200 kilometer an hour analysis, Sergio Perez, 5.15. Fernando Alonso, 4.98. So either Sergio bogged down or pure acceleration, the Aston Martin is faster than a Red Bull. Not in on-track performance, not the downforce package and all that, but maybe just in flat-out 0 to 200, that Aston Martin's got pace.
So Sergio actually got asked about this in the after the race post-race interviews, and I believe he was talking something to the effect of that's Bahrain now and Saudi Arabia where the car got bogged down at the jump. So he's going to have to work with the race engineers to find out what exactly it is that's causing that and how we can fix it going into the next round.
He's throttling up too fast. The car's just not ready for him.
Yeah, I guess so.
But no, your race order pretty much throughout lap 1 all the way through lap 3 goes Alonso, Perez, Russell, Stroll, Sainz. Obviously, Alonso got that really good jump, took the inside line into turn 1. And I didn't know how that was going to play out. The announcers, Crofty and Brundle, were kind of clear that Alonso's battle wasn't with Red Bull. I was thinking it kind of is, though, but after a little bit of Sergio just eating up that difference on Alonso, it was very clear the Red Bull car is still the much more dominant car.
No, at this point, you've got Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin looking like they're going to be challenging for that number 2 spot, and Red Bull just kind of walking with it.
Yep. The reason I mentioned at the start that turn 1 is key in Jeddah is because outside of that, really action doesn't take place anywhere else except for right before turn 1 on the home straightaway. You have or the grandstand straightaway, you have the DRS zone where people will overtake as they dive into turn 1. But essentially everywhere else on the track, you're just trying to hold within that 1 second so that you get the DRS on the grandstand straightaway through the start finish line. I will note that halfway through lap 1, Fernando Alonso gets noted and penalized 5 seconds for his grid placement. He was too far left. You could not see that at the start because the starting camera was looking front right of the drivers, and so you couldn't tell that he was over the left line, but he was clearly off when they showed the behind the grid image. They joked around in his post-race interview, which almost didn't happen and then almost didn't happen again. That he hasn't been racing very long, so he needs some more experience lining up on the grid.
Keep going with lap 1. We've got Lance Stroll moving into 4th, making it an Aston Martin 1 and 4 at the end of lap 1.
Yeah. I was going to say they look good all day, but Stroll had his incident later on, which we'll get to. But yeah, let's dive into a little bit on as we get past lap 1. I don't have any notes for lap 2. No idea what happened there. I think they were just kind of holding that order that we gave earlier and trying to stay within a second for when DRS kicked on in lap 3. That's when Norris pops up that he has damage. I know he got the damage in lap 1, but lap 3 is when it was indicated to the viewers. I noted Haas was at 11 and 12 at this point, and I was like, could it be a Haas day? It wasn't, but it could have been. And then lap 4 is where going into turn 1 again, you kind of have your first big action of the race after the start. Sergio takes back that number 1 spot,
which was expected. I mean, we couldn't expect Fernando to stay in front of that Red Bull for too long. It's just the fact that he got that run at the beginning that was so exciting.
You know what that shows me about Sergio, though? He's the Minister of Defense. We know he's great at running tires long and limiting tire degradation. He can adapt his driving style to what he needs to do to win. He went full aggressive for 4 laps. He had the fastest lap time after he held the fastest lap almost the entire race until the end, where him and Verstappen were exchanging fastest laps. He wasn't messing around holding that P1 spot.
No, we'll talk about Sergio's aggression more as we get towards the end of the end of this race, because I do want to talk about that battle that you just mentioned.
His biggest battle wasn't with Fernando; it was with his teammates.
No. Well, we'll get into that later. Let's keep going.
Lap 5. Now, this happened all in lap 1, as Jeremiah told me before we hopped on. But I noted Leclerc was up to 9th from 12th. But again, that all happened in lap 1. Max Verstappen at this point goes from 15 to 11. And we all know just from last year, Verstappen has the capability of going from the 20th spot to the top 10, right? But 15 to 1 is quite a jump. And so to get there, you have to start making moves early. And he was doing that. But also at the same time, Fernando and Sergio were really pushing the lead out. They were like 8 seconds ahead of the 3, 4, and 5 spot at that point. So I did not think Verstappen was going to have a shot at a podium throughout the first half of the race.
Yeah, I did like a little note that they threw in there was that nobody has gone from 15th to 1st except Fernando Alonso in 2008.
2008 Singapore.
Yeah. This is Jeremiah, co-host of Turn 1 podcast. We're going to get right back to this week's episode, but first I wanted to let you know where you can go to find us. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Turn 1 Podcast. If you want to check out our audio-only version, you can check us out on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts at Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. For any questions, concerns, you can reach us at trn1podcast@gmail.com. All right. Let's get back to it.
Lap number 5, the same lap we were on, there was a battle for 7th between Hamilton, Gasly, and Leclerc that lasted about 3 laps. Lap 8, Leclerc still the only driver on softs. There were a couple of guys that pitted before that with those issues that we mentioned at the start of the race, but they never went to softs. But I put this note, Leclerc the only driver still on softs. Leclerc controls when the first true pit stop is at this point, because he's the only one on softs. Anybody that took damage at the front, that's not like a real... Right. That doesn't affect the strategy of the race. So that the question being tossed around on the broadcast was, will that open up a hole for Verstappen to squeeze or to slide through if Leclerc goes off early and triggers a bunch of people on the mediums to pit as well?
That's kind of tough. I mean, he was the only one on softs. Softs obviously degrade the fastest. So I don't see anybody else pitting right after him. But I mean...
Let's see. Lap 9, Leclerc passes Hamilton in turn 1. Again, like 90% of the passes were in turn 1. This is when Hamilton comes on team radio and says that he is struggling for grip on the hards.
Yeah, that was exciting because then you started hearing everybody on their team radios talking about, oh, the hards are no good. The hards are no good. We can't go to the hards.
And I really thought Ferrari was going to be like, let's go to the hards.
Well, I mean, everybody ended up going to the hards.
Yeah.
And I mean, they held out pretty well for the rest of the race, at least for everybody else.
I don't think 9 laps was enough to heat them up yet and get them worn in. Lap 10. This is where you have Verstappen and Hamilton fighting for 8th. I'm going to say it's a fight because it did last 4 or 5. Where did it say? It lasted 3 laps. That's a pretty good fight. Although whenever the overtake did come, he just said, see ya, and flew right by him. There was no wheel to wheel, side to side. There was no rubbing. It was just bye.
No, it's like we said, that Red Bull's power is just way too strong. I think if anything, Max was just being conservative, waiting for, he knew that once he got to that straight, he would be close enough. And he was probably setting it up, honestly. He was probably setting it up to where he'd be a specific distance behind him going under that last straight so that when he got the DRS, it was just smooth sailing.
Going back to my last note on Hamilton and the Mercedes, what did we notice in Bahrain? They had horrible tire degradation. They did not fix that, I don't think. I think they're still struggling with it. It's better than Bahrain, but clearly Mercedes still struggling, I think, a little bit. Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Lap 14, Sainz has a dummy call to box, and he does not box. That was a cool little strategic thing from the Ferrari pit wall that we did not see much last year, was dummy calls. Lap 16, I note good Ferrari strategy, and that is the first time in 2 seasons of watching these live that I've notated good Ferrari strategy. Sainz had the overcut strategy from Ferrari, and he came out ahead of the Aston Martin Lance Stroll
By a lot.
Yep. And then just 2 or 3 laps later, who also comes out ahead of Stroll? Charles Leclerc. So their strategy worked.
Yeah, that was good. No, I enjoyed that. That was good to see Ferrari actually selling a strategy for once.
Okay, biggest event of the day. Do you remember what happened in lap 17?
Probably, but why don't you go ahead and give us what you wrote down?
Oh, Lance Stroll.
Yeah.
He is told to stop on track. The camera cuts to him and he's already stopped. He's kind of already off the track, which I thought was weird because that where the camera first showed him off the track would not be where a safety car would be triggered. He was well off the track. So I think they had some time before they cut to him. But when they did cut to him, the marshals were spraying a fire extinguisher all over his car because the brakes caught on fire. But that was not the issue that caused him to stop. I never heard what the actual cause for that was.
I didn't hear them saying anything. Like you said, we just saw him pulling off to the side and then them spraying down the brakes just to cool him off. His car, I feel like, I don't know. It's tough because they didn't give us an actual like description of what exactly went down. It was kind of just moved on, kept going back into the race. We might do a little digging into that and then maybe make a mention in the weekly podcast. But yeah, as for what happened, I'm not 100% sure on that yet.
So the safety car did a couple things to the race. One, Sergio already had a full like pit stops lead on anybody else that would be in contention, including Max Verstappen at that point, which that brings Max Verstappen into the picture. So going into the safety car, I'm looking at lap 19, you had Perez, Alonso, Russell, Verstappen. That is a huge difference than the last standings we gave for lap 3, where Verstappen was in 12th or 11th or whatever he was. Now he's in 4th with the fastest lap, and they're all bunched up next to each other.
Yeah, you know that's his favorite game to play is cat and mouse on those safety cars.
Yeah, and that's what he needed to be in the race. I think. I don't think if the race had held with no safety car that he would have made it up to the podium positions because again, Sergio and almost Fernando Alonso had a full pit stop ahead of the 4 spot, which was huge. I did note in lap 23, Max Verstappen had gained 11 positions, Yuki Tsunoda 8, and Logan Sargent 6 positions for Mr. Sargent.
Yeah, I didn't know how the Tsunoda and the Sargent happened. I just kind of like looked over and all of a sudden they had just climbed the leaderboard. I was like, okay, how does that work?
We did have the note of Hamilton goes from hards to mediums on lap 18, 19. So I was a little bit worried that he didn't make those hards last long enough. He kind of did, so that worked out. Here's where I flash back to McLaren, like you mentioned, possibly being the new Ferrari. They pit Lando Norris at the end of the safety car. What are we doing, McLaren?
Yeah, it's one thing if you just don't have the car and you're trying to figure out the car, don't start messing up on strategy. I mean, that's something that you can absolutely help right now.
Fast forwarding a little bit, safety car ends with that spot that we just listed a couple of minutes ago is still the same order. The first couple of moves start to happen lap 22 and 23. Hamilton takes the 5 spot from Carlos Sainz. It was interesting to see a Mercedes be faster than a Ferrari. That hasn't happened in a while. And then you had Verstappen chasing Russell, which I didn't think would be much of a battle after they were all bunched up. The safety car was triggered though. I didn't know that this is how they track the cars. Every car has GPS in it, which I guess I knew they had some kind of tracking thing, but I didn't know they had like the track mapped out. And the Stroll's car location indicated that it was still on the track, even if that's just like a millimeter of its rear wing sticking on the track at the time of stopping. It triggers the safety car message automatically.
I did not know that.
So we're always talking like,
Oh,
is this going to be a safety car? Is this going to be whatever? Well, sometimes it's just automatic. If a car is stopped on track, safety car.
Huh. I guess I didn't realize that they had a sensor that was that in depth. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's what
that
they
feels
said. And
like
they
that's
said, I think Brundle was the one that said, even if it's like a millimeter of the rear wing, it'll catch it.
okay. Well, cool.
Lap 23, Fernando Alonso said this all day. He was really liking his tires and how that Aston Martin was set up, I guess. And he said that all last week and do. What did he say 2 weeks ago? What a lovely car to drive.
Yeah, well, he was very happy on those hards whenever he came out of the pits. I guess that he liked not necessarily even the degradation levels, but probably the grip levels, and how he was probably worried about some because of the messages that they got from Mercedes that the hards weren't going to be a good tire. But once they got on there and he actually got moving, it felt like it was very grippy for him and he liked it. So he made a point to let everybody know.
Lap 23, this was just a funny broadcast quote. Verstappen overtakes George Russell. The quote was, "It looks like an F1 car against an F2."
Yeah, I heard that one.
Ouch.
And then he was
He
like,
had
no disrespect to Mercedes.
They said he had a 17 mile per hour advantage on the DRS straight.
Jeez.
17 miles an hour. Okay. Lap 26. Red Bull 1 and 2 with Sergio Perez in the 1 spot.
And Alex Albon loses his brakes.
Was that lap 26?
Yeah, that was lap 26.
It was lap 26, sure enough.
Yeah, and then the best part about that is as his brakes are failing, everybody's approaching the pits, and you think, okay, here comes Alex going into the pits. They're gonna either work on it or retire the car. No, he goes around for another lap
at maybe
let
2/3
everybody
speed.
pass. Yeah, had to let every single person pass him when he could have just dove into the pits right then and there. Takes another lap of, I guess it's a victory lap. I don't know. Once he gets to the end, hops back in the pits, and I think they got it fixed is what ended up happening because I don't think. Oh no, he DNF. That's right. So
Yeah.
they didn't get it fixed. No, he was
They
out of
did
the
not
race
get it
after that.
fixed.
No.
I noted on lap 27, Albon passes pits while slowing down.
It was almost
your
instantly.
chance.
Yeah, it was they passed the pits and then immediately going into turn 1, that's when he started his slowdown process. I was like, hey, you could have just gone in.
It's not qualifying where you run a heater and then you take a lap to get back to the pits.
A cool down lap.
Yeah. Lap 28. This was interesting because this lasted actually throughout the race. Because George Russell finished ahead of Lewis still. Lap 28, Russell holding up Lewis Hamilton. The reason I say that was because the thought was that Lewis was going faster by a 10th or 2 a lap than George Russell. The tires were different. And they come on the radio and they say, George, we need you to run these lap times or we're going to have Lewis Hamilton pass you. And George says, no. Fernando's got a 5-second penalty. I'm on him. I'm getting him. They said, George, he already served the penalty.
Yeah, no, that was bad. That looked bad on George's part just from the confusion. But it was interesting because in George's eyes, he was thinking that what they could do is get both Lewis and George up on Fernando so that whenever he had to serve that penalty, they could both kind of leapfrog over him. That
Right.
did not happen. And in full respect, I will say with George kind of kicking it off right after that moment, whenever he said he's going to start pushing hard, Lewis kind of started to fade back. He didn't really keep that time, didn't really keep right up on George's gearbox. He started to fall back to, I believe, 2 seconds.
Yeah, it was close and it looked close for like a lap or two, and then it looked like, okay, we're in the right order where they were at.
Yeah.
I made the note after that, just as the I was pulling up Sergio's Wikipedia page, looking at his race history while the race was going on. The announcers were talking about it too. He is not the king of street circuits, but he's really good at street circuits. Sergio is. And that showed every time before the safety car and after the safety car, he just pulled out to massive multi-second leads that not the Max Verstappen, like 20, 30, 40-second lead, but an 8 to a 12-second lead is pretty good.
Yeah, at one point I looked at Fernando Alonso to see how far back he'd fallen, and I believe he was 15 seconds back on Sergio. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that race is over between them.
So moving on down, lap 30, we had a we didn't have a lot happening between when the safety car ended and almost the end of the race. It kind of held. There were a couple little one spot battles, but they really never materialized. You had the battle for 12th between Hulkenberg, Sargent, and Joe. I just thought that was a very interesting combo for 12th. I would have said that would have been the fight for 17th. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely wasn't expecting to see Nick DeVries chomping at the bit to get apart any higher than 17th, honestly.
Lap 34, Charles Leclerc comes on the radio and he is upset with, I just think, how the race is unfolding. I don't think he was upset with his team or his car or anything like that. He just found out that he was in like 7th or 8th and he was like, this stinks. I forget what the exact message was, but it's something effective. I hate racing from right here.
Oh my gosh. No, Ferrari definitely had a hard day. Like I said, they didn't look impressive one bit.
He got so used to racing in nice, clean air of P2 with Max being 40 seconds ahead of him that this is way different for him being in 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Or at least in last year, how he was able to bring it to Max up until the reliability issues would happen or the tires would shoot. But I mean, this race, there's just no competition between Ferrari and Red Bull. It's very, very upsetting.
Yeah. This is not how we thought. The competition is with nobody, the closest contender being Aston Martin, which they're still not a contender. And here's why they're not a contender. Lap 37, Red Bull lapping at 1 second faster than the Aston Martins. 1 second a lap.
Yeah. I also noted that this is the same lap where Max finally starts with his drive shaft issues.
Yeah, I had that a little bit later on. I want to clarify in the 1 second thing. If you're new to F1 at all, you're like, okay, 1 second's not a big deal over the course of a minute and 30 seconds. When we look at qualifying, you go down to the thousandths of a second. Who was it that got kicked out of P2 by 4 thousandths of a second? Maybe it was Magnussen that got kicked out. Somebody got kicked out by 4 thousandths of a second. So whenever we go,
Hulkenberg,
it might have been Hulkenberg. So whenever we go to a race and you're talking about a second a lap, that is massive.
No, if you're getting a second a lap over anybody, that race is over. You're no longer fighting that person. I mean, there's not a chance.
Yeah, and then back to what you brought up, lap 37 comes on the radio. Verstappen, he says he's got a rough drive shaft, and they were comparing it to the problems he had in Q2 the day prior, which took him out of qualifying.
Yeah, apparently it was making some kind of high frequency sounding like wincing sound or something. And I don't know if the engineers just weren't seeing anything and they were trying to blame it on the brake balance and everything else. But Max is like, no, listen, I know something is not right.
Yeah. He had that concern constantly on the radio for the next 4 laps. They played a bit of audio from him 3 or 4 times, just that he was very concerned. And the pit wall kept saying, we're pretty happy with the car. And he said, I'm not.
Yeah. No, that was.
You know what I was worried about, though? Do you remember last year, 2022, Bahrain, the first race of the year last year? Both Red Bulls went out almost the same time with car issues. Max reports on lap 37, 38 that he's got a drive shaft issue. Sergio on lap 40 says, I've got a loose brake pedal.
Yeah, it was a, I think was it loose or long?
It was brake? long brake pedal.
Yeah. So long brake regarding in terms of like
it's mushy.
When you're driving an F1 car, the brake pedal, there's not a lot of give. I mean, when you're stomping, it's basically, it's sensing your pressure that you're putting on the pedal, but there's not a lot of forward and back motion like you would on a daily driving car in the city or something like that. So when he's talking about a long brake, it means that he's pressing down and it's going way further than it should. And that could be a problem.
They did come in a couple laps later and say, no, you're good. It's wearing down. So that's why he's got to push it a little bit harder. But I was like, are we about to have 2 Red Bulls DNF in this race?
Man.
I was worried. Okay, here's something that annoyed me throughout the race, and then we'll kind of get to the end here. They showed a lot of Haas and AlphaTauri battles. Those cars look really similar, and it is really hard to tell them apart. Because AlphaTauri has the Orland sponsorship now, so they've got red, and they've got the really dark blue and white. And what is the Haas car? White, black, and red.
Yeah, whenever I was going back and I was trying to watch the onboards for all of turn 1, I kept getting confused. I was like, okay, who is that? And then I would look over and I would see, like, it wouldn't be until right before they're about to launch, I would look over and I would make out the blue bull and I'm like, okay, that's AlphaTauri.
Yeah, because they both have the white hood coming up the front of the car. They both have dark blue or black sides, and then the rear wing is red. And I was like, they need to ban this. This is like two football teams wearing home uniforms together.
Yeah, when they were doing the overhead shots and they were showing all the cars taking off, you couldn't tell AlphaTauri from Haas. They basically looked the exact same over top.
Okay, they've got to fix that. Lap 43, I note that DeVries and Sargent kind of collide. They didn't really call it out on the broadcast, but they definitely touched.
Did they? I didn't even notice that.
It's the long hairpin at the end of as you're coming back down the second half of the track. I don't know what, maybe turn 12 or 13. They definitely slide into each other. I'm convinced of it. So that could have been another safety car, which means we had the chance of ending the race on a safety car, which always stinks, but I'm glad that did not happen. Lap 43 is also when Sergio comes on the radio and they say to him, Sergio, we want you to lap at 36.4 or whatever, 33.4 lap. And he's like, is that what you told Max?
Yeah, I thought that was hilarious because I'm like, oh, Sergio's getting a little suspicious.
Yeah, he wanted it. There was no doubt about it. He wanted it.
He wanted to make sure that they weren't telling him to lap at one time and then they're telling Max set the fastest lap. Go, go, go.
But to their point, even if Red Bull said they wanted Max to lap faster because maybe he was getting pressure from behind, which he wasn't, 0.4 a lap was not enough to overcome the 6 or 7 seconds, or five, it was like 5 to 6 was where Sergio was reigning to end the race.
Yeah, the reason that they did that whole +4 thing was I think they were saying that you can go up to that time +4 and still beat Max.
Lap 44, Red Bulls come back on, both cars free to push. So essentially, hey, we know we told you that you can run these lap times. Do whatever. Because what really mattered at the end of the race? What was the differentiator between the constructor standings?
Nothing.
There's 1 point. The fastest lap point.
You mean in the driver's standings?
Yeah. Did I say constructors?
Yeah, you say constructors.
Oh, sorry. The driver's standings.
No, in the drivers, yeah. If Sergio had gotten that fastest lap and held on to it, he would be the reigning champ as of right now.
Right. And so I think they gave them that free to push as like, okay, let's have some gamesmanship here. Let's have some fun. They know Max is still going to be the guy after this race, but sure, have this fun. If this was 2021, Max v. Lewis, they would not have given Sergio that win.
Yeah, well, because it was a tight battle. I mean, they had to have Max getting all those points, so they definitely would have team orders Max his way through so that he could make his statement against Hamilton.
Lap 45, man, did you catch this? The McLaren was slower than the Williams when it had DRS.
Yeah, I saw Lando trying to go for the pass, not able to make it out, and kind of had to bail out. That was kind of sad. I noted also on 45 with the McLarens, them battling it out.
Yes, so I put McLaren's battling.
So McLaren's Oscar Piastri goes for the pass on Lando Norris. Lando, a couple turns later, brings it right back to him, shoving it up the inside corner and kind of pushing Oscar to the outside a little bit. At which point the race engineer comes on and he goes, Lando, stop making it difficult for Oscar, please.
Because he had it. He had the speed.
Oh my gosh.
Lap 49, the penultimate lap, George Russell is told that we learned about this maybe 1 or 2 laps before, that there was the possibility of Fernando Alonso having a penalty for how he served his other penalty, right? A similar deal to Esteban Ocon's issues in Bahrain. You serve one penalty incorrectly, you then get slapped with another penalty. It could be 5 seconds, could be 10 seconds, whatever the FIA determines. So Russell comes on the radio on lap 49 and says he's pushing like a bad man out of heaven. Was what I thought.
I caught I'm pushing like a madman.
Okay, bad man or bad, either way.
And then the race engineer goes, keep pushing like a madman.
He was super casual while trying to make up that 5, because basically his thought was, if I get within 5 seconds and he gets a 5-second penalty, I'm now 3, which we'll cover here in a minute in our wrap up.
Before you keep going, because you're at lap 49 now, I'm going to bounce back a little bit. Lap 46, I've got Max coming on the radio and going, what's the fastest lap?
Oh, I didn't catch that.
And then his race engineer goes, we're not interested in that right now, Max. To which Max goes, I know, but I am.
I thought they could see that on their monitor on their wheel, but maybe they can't.
Maybe not. I think they can only see their best time that they've set personally.
Okay.
I don't know 100% on that. Oh, I also have on lap 48, Sonoda getting passed by Magnussen, to which she comes on the radio and goes, "No!"
Okay, so nothing happened between those last 3 laps. You had Verstappen and Perez racing, although Verstappen never came within 4 seconds of him. So it wasn't really a race. The biggest thing was the controversy with Alonso, which we'll get to in a second. But here's your final order. You had in the number 1, the winner, Sergio Perez from Red Bull. Max Verstappen goes from 15 to 2 to take second place in the race. Fernando Alonso 3, George Russell 4, Lewis Hamilton 5. Then you have the Ferrari 6 and 7. Ouch. And then you have the Alpines 8 and 9, a pretty good little bounce back from
Pleasant
Bahrain.
surprise.
And then Kevin Magnussen 10th.
And that's what I meant when I was talking about lap 48, where Sonoda gets passed by Magnussen. Sonoda had that number 1, or not number 1. He had that
the 1 point.
Yeah, he had that 1 point for AlphaTauris. He was going to finish with that 1 point. In comes Kevin Magnussen, who's at this point, this was like his second or third attempt to try and pass Sonoda. Whenever he would get the door shut on him and he would kind of lose momentum, work his way back, he was just overall faster than Sonoda. I mean, it was awesome to watch. And they even talked about how I think it was Kevin Magnussen that really likes street circuits because he always does really well in qualifying. So I was hoping that he would get that point. So that was an awesome battle to watch.
Before we get to the Alonso controversy, which will take us home on this race recap, here's a couple more notes from your final standings. 14, 15, 16 goes De Vries, Piastri, Sargent, all your rookies in a row. Who's 1 spot ahead of them in 13? Zhou Guan Yu, the second closest thing to a rookie as he's got in his second year on the track. Here's another thing, which we've teased this a couple times throughout this race recap. I made a prediction early on in the season that I thought the McLarens would now be very close to a backmarker team. I said, I think my quote was, I see them battling it out with Williams and AlphaTauri for the 8, 9, 10 spot. Where is McLaren? Battling it out with the Williams and the AlphaTauri.
That's not a bad look. I called you crazy.
You had in 14th an AlphaTauri, 15th a McLaren, 16 a William, 17 a McLaren.
Yeah, it's granted, we haven't been able to see a race with them having like an actual clean race where nothing goes wrong, but that's kind of what racing is, especially at the F1 level, is you got to be able to get to the end. I mean,
okay, so the race ends. You go Sergio, Max, and Fernando. Can you break down the events immediately following the race, the podium celebration, and then the news that drops?
So they have the podium celebration. Fernando Alonso gets his 100th podium. So that brings him, I think he's the number 6 driver of all time to break 100 podiums. Anyway, giant celebration, blah, blah, blah. And then after it kind of starts to fade away, it goes back and it plays the replay of the pit of Fernando Alonso. And then it shows at the top, the stewards, and it goes Fernando Alonso, 10-second penalty for incorrect serving of penalty or something like that.
Yeah. Touching the car while serving a penalty.
Whatever they labeled it as, that's what it was, is it was an incorrect serving of the time penalty that he had for lining up wrong. Anyway, Fernando Alonso moves down to 4th position. So now we see the post-race interviews where they bring in the 3 drivers on stage, and it's Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and George Russell.
And why was the penalty time key? We said that earlier it could be 5 or 10 seconds. If it was only 5, he had 5 seconds.
Dude, and I was watching this. So for the last lap, I was sitting there watching George Russell's time go from like 4.9, 4.95, 4.8, and then it was like 5.0, 5.02, 5.03, and I was like, go, Fernando, go!
And he got it, but then he got slapped with a 10-second penalty.
That's ridiculous.
So that's where Jeremiah stopped his race day. He said, that's good. I'm going to go compile my notes, watch the replays, all that. So we come on here to start our race recap, and I say, hey, man, did you see the news about Fernando? And he goes, yeah, that he got kicked down to 4th. I go, oh, no, my friend. Aston Martin appealed the penalty, and they won the appeal.
Giving my man his 3rd back.
So basically they said that, one, just to clarify, Fernando Alonso fully celebrates in the podium celebrations that he gets 3rd. You go into the post-race interview that happens where they're in chairs and all that. You have George Russell in the 3 spot. And then after everything's done and everybody's go home, they're like, go back to how we originally had it. Alonso, you get 3rd. The reason, though, they said that there was never a confirmed or thought out agreement between the FIA and the teams as to what denoted working on the car and whether a jack touching a car was working on the car. So the FIA said, hey, we messed up by penalizing you for something that we never really said was a penalty. Take your spot back.
So I will say this about that. When you have these great teams, you have Christian Horner going to war with anybody and everybody for Red Bull anytime there's any kind of way that he might be able to wiggle out of any situation. You have Total Wolf doing the exact same thing for Mercedes. So whatever Lawrence Stroll is building over there at Aston Martin, it's working, and I like it.
Yeah, I think that takes us into just our final wrap-up observations. I'll give mine, and then if you want to provide yours. Red Bull looks like they're going to be dominant all year long. The fact that Sergio could not only hold off one, but really pull ahead 2 different times in the race. Max going from 15 to 2 was huge. To your last point, Aston Martin is consistently good. They might have reliability problems, which they have to address with Stroll's car, but their car is fast and they can be the second constructor this year if they just don't fall behind anybody rolling out upgrade packages. Ferrari is really struggling. I am scared for them to even be the third constructor right now. It looks like they are in a battle with the Mercedes and potentially the Alpines for that spot. And then McLaren has just lost their minds.
Yeah, pretty much. My thoughts on that kind of the same. Red Bull seems like they're gonna walk away with this whole season. I've got Aston Martin probably, and granted, there's a whole lot of other races to go, but I have Aston Martin probably finishing in the second spot in terms of constructors, at least for now. I mean, things might change when it comes to the halfway mark and we come back and there might be upgrades on the Mercedes and Ferraris that changes things. But for right now, it looks like Aston Martin's pretty much going to hold that number 2 spot. Ferrari looks about the same as Mercedes, maybe a little bit faster on good days, but definitely not today. And Alpine kind of slotted right back in where they were behind the top teams. The only difference now being Aston Martin is one of those top teams. The only thing that I have that might kind of interfere with what you had going on just now is I'm going to say that if McLaren gets their stuff together in terms of having a clean race, I see them jumping probably right behind the Alpines.
I don't think they're going to get it together. They look dysfunctional. I think Zach Brown's getting fired at the end of this year based on how this is going. I think the team principal's getting canned. I mean,
it just got hired.
I don't care. This is horrible. Last little note. So we're not watching. If you're not watching the front of the pack, you're like, okay, we just said Red Bull's running away with it. Why do I care? There are really great battles, like we just mentioned, for the midfield between Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine, Mercedes. That is going to be awesome all year long, I think, to see who the true number 2 is, because it's still up in the air. It looks like Aston Martin, but it's still up in the air. Also, Haas is improving. Yeah. Haas looks okay. I mean, obviously not a contender, but a decent midfield team, maybe.
Yeah, I think that they looked good. Before we wrap up, my last kind of point, for those of you that are watching these races and kind of upset about Red Bull running away with this, let me offer an alternative mindset to this. This is part of the story. We had Sebastian Vettel with Red Bull winning 2010, 2011, 12, and 13. That was part of the story. We had Lewis Hamilton winning outright after that, pretty much, except for 1 year with Nico Rosberg. These are parts of the story. It might not be the beginning when he wins the first one. It might not be the end where it's his last one and then the competition comes back. But this is the part this is the meat of the story. This is what builds these kind of mantras where we put these people on a pedestal and we talk about their career. This is one of those defining years. It might not be exciting, but if you look at it as telling the story of Max Verstappen, it's kind of cool because you're thinking, wow, we're living while it's happening right now. How many is he going to get? Is he going to get 6? And we're just watching number 3 unfold right now? That's crazy, man.
And you're trying to see who's the team that's going to step up and challenge him. Who's going to team that's going to bring in a new driver that goes off? Who's the team that's going to roll out a car that is crazy and competes with the Red Bull? So we'll see that as they start to roll out upgrade packages here in a few weeks as they get their stimulations down. But man, I'm excited with how these first 2 races turned out. Like, you couldn't ask for a better 2 races in terms of pure mix of racing, drama, safety cars, collisions, overtakes. It's a good start to 2023.
Yeah, I think we're in for an exciting season this year.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix race recap for the Turn One podcast. We appreciate y'all listening and watching us. Please follow us at Turn One Podcast on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
And guys, please let us know your thoughts about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in the comments down below. We want to know what your hot takes were for how it happened, what you saw out there that maybe we didn't mention. Let us know down in the comments.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.